played one of those name association games or watched a television show where there's a name association game? And I don't think I've ever played one, but I think you know what I'm talking about. When somebody says a word, where they say tall, and I play it in my mind, and I always think of opposites. So you say tall, I say short. You say big, I say small. Do you know what I'm talking about with the name associations? Well, it got me to thinking, as I was thinking about this game of, we say light versus dark. We always think in contrast, that you say big, I say small, and how much emphasis we put in contrast in our world. We talk about boys versus girls. We talk about old things versus new things. We talk about expensive things versus cheap things. We talk about highs versus lows, hots versus cold. We talk about Democrats versus Republicans, some of the different things that we contrast in our day. But the epitome of contrast is right outside. It is the Illinois weather, because we can have our air conditioner on and our heater on in the same day. Am I right? Yeah, we all know what we're talking about. Well, in the Bible, there's contrast as well, and we put contrast as well. We talk about David, the shepherd boy, versus the warrior Goliath. And then later on, as David gets older, we talk about Saul, his predecessor, who lost it a little bit and was affected by the witch of Endor, and then David, who was a man after God's own heart. And we talked a little bit about this last week when we were talking about Mary and Martha. We contrast Mary and Martha. Or we might contrast in the New Testament Peter and Paul, the different ministry styles that they have. Well, our scripture today itself is a contrast. We have in this psalm the first 11 verses, and we're only going to look at the first 11 verses, but the entire Psalm 40 is kind of cut up between thanksgiving and lament. But we're only going to look at the first 11. And within that, there's contrast as well. And it got me thinking about some questions that we can think about as we're going through. The first question that we're going to think about, what song are we singing? Are we singing an old song, or are we singing a new song? Secondly, do we celebrate God's law, or do we cringe at God's law? And finally, when we think about God's love, do we reveal it, or do we conceal it? Let's look at our scripture passage together, Psalm 40, 1 through 11. Here are these words from the book that we love. David writes, I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet upon a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not look to the proud, to those who turn aside to false gods. Many, O Lord my God, are the wonders you have done. The things you have planned for us, no one can recount to you. Were I to speak and tell of them, there would be too many to declare. Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but my ears you have pierced. Burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not require. Then I said, here I am, I have come. It is written about me in the scroll. I desire to do your will, O my God. Your law is within my heart. I proclaim righteousness in the great assembly. I do not seal my lips, as you know, O Lord. I do not hide your righteousness in my heart. I speak of your faithfulness and salvation. I do not conceal your love and your truth from the great assembly. Do not withhold me from your mercy, O Lord. May your love and your truth always protect me. Here ends our reading this morning. Several years ago, a young pastor stayed at the home of a young couple, and he was awakened in the morning by the words to a lovely hymn, Near My God to Thee. And when he went down in the morning at breakfast, he mentioned to his hostess how he loved singing or hearing those words that morning. But he said, it seemed to go much faster than I ever remember it being sung before. Oh, the hostess said, I guess that's because I wasn't actually paying attention to the words. You see, it's a good song that my mother used to sing, but I found out that it's a good song to boil eggs by. You just repeat the first verse 5 times rapidly for soft-boiled eggs and 8 times for hard-boiled eggs. We need to pay attention to the words that we are singing. What song are we singing? Are we singing an old song or a new song? I'm going to be the first one to admit that I do not have a good singing voice. Nor do I want to make like I have a good singing voice or fake like I have a good singing voice. And my wife is going. And it got me thinking about this scripture, and we're looking at this scripture, and we're talking about singing a song. I'm not a singer, I'm not a musician, but yet it's important that we are singing this song. It's our lifestyle that we are singing. It's important. This passage is an important one for us to hear. Look at what he says in the very first verse that we read. He says, "I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry." Biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann translates these same words saying, "I hope intensely for the Lord." So when David's talking, he's recalling some of the experiences that he's had. He's looking back to the places, those times in his life where he had nowhere else to turn. He had exhausted all options, and so he goes to God and he asks, "Will you please intercede?" And that's exactly what happens. God is faithful to him. He pulls him out of the miry pit. He pulls him out of the mud and mire and sets them back on the rock. I don't know about you, but there are some points in our lives where God does that, where we exhaust all of our options, and God takes us and puts us out of the mud and mire. He cleans us off and sets us back on the rock. Jesus Christ is that rock that he sets us on. It reminds me of the words of a wonderful song, "On Christ the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand." Each one of us has had those experiences where God takes us and puts us back on the rock. And it probably won't be the last time that he does that. But what we need to ask in our lives is, do we respond in that way? Do we call on his name during those times? Did you hear about the woman who got really upset and quit singing in the choir? Well, one day she was absent that Sunday, and several people inquired if the organ had been fixed because there was a new song. It's important to recognize the role of God, but we also need to think about the song that we are singing, the new song. Verse 3 says, "He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord." David's talking about singing a new song because of those experiences. This brings us back to our real point. What song are we singing? Are we singing the old song, or are we singing the new song? When we think about the song that we're singing, God takes us and pulls us out of the mud and mire. And I know that there have been points in my life, and I can't speak for you, where I will sing God's praises. I'll sing that new song. But so often, so many times, I'll be singing that new song for maybe a week, and then I'll forget about it, or I'll stop doing it. Or it might be to the point that I thank God for taking me out of the mud and mire and for putting me on the rock, and then just kind of move on with my life. Or we get to the point sometimes where we just expect it from God. But that's not what David's saying. We need to keep that new song in our heart at all times. It reminds us of how faithful God is. It's a reminder of how constant and wonderful God's love is. And I'd like to challenge us that during those times where we think that we're singing that old song, to look back towards the times that God has been faithful to us. And it's a little bit what David does. Look at verse 5 with me for just a moment. David writes, "Many, O Lord my God, are the wonders you have done. The things you have planned for us, no one can recount to you. Were I to speak and tell of them, there would be too many to declare." Creating that list is going to cause us to sing that new song, a reminder of what God is constantly doing in our life, a statement of his love and his faithfulness. What song are we singing in our lives? Joshua singing a loud song this morning? Are we singing a new song that's loud and happy, or are we singing an old song? What can we do to remind ourselves of what God is doing in our lives, and how might we help others to see what song they are singing in their lives? One winter, a resort in Breckenridge, Colorado, posted signs instructing skiers to keep off of a certain slope. This sign was very large and distinct and said, "Danger, out of bounds." Well, despite these warnings, several skiers went into that area. And the result was that there was a half-mile wide avalanche that buried the 4 trespassers beneath snow and rock. That tragedy wouldn't have ever happened if they would have heeded the signs that were placed. Now, when we think about God's law, do we cringe or do we celebrate? Growing up in an extended family that was very close, many of the things that we liked to do were to play card games. And I know that we played all different kinds of card games, ranging from solitaire and hearts to wizard and what's it's called hand and foot, which is a little bit like canasta. And I know that some of us, when we play different games, it not only do you know the basic rules, but then there are those house rules that you got to think about, right? Like when you're playing Monopoly, and some people play that if you reach go and you land directly on go, you get $500 or you get $400 rather than getting $200. Or perhaps if you draw, I know that in my family when you're playing hand and foot, if you guess correctly the number of cards that you have to deal out, you get an extra 100 points. Or on Friday, as Colin and Katie and Chris and I were playing Scattergories, if you get a Mickey Mouse, like a double M, you get an extra point for that on Scattergories. I think you know what I'm talking about. And it's very exciting when you benefit from those house rules, right? That's a great rule when I land on go and I get $500 and I just had hit Boardwalk, right? It's a wonderful thing to get that. But when my wife is going to benefit from that, it's all of a sudden it doesn't take so much fun. I mean, I don't like that rule anymore. I don't want that to happen, right?